there's no room in this sport for continued hate. There's enough hate as it is with people having to fist fight each other in the cage and controversy and whatever. It has no room for this kind of hate and this kind of stupidity. So when it comes to stuff like this, Bryce, keep your mouth shut and just keep talking about seatbelts.
Welcome in, everyone. It's episode 113 of the MMA Outsiders. My name is Bando. That's Pat. Danna to my right. We have a whole lot to get to today. It's the first week in February, if you will. It's the week of the Super Bowl, but it's also the week of UFC 312 and so much more. Pat, how are you this evening, my friend?
Doing all right. Happy to break down some of the fights we had this past weekend and break down some of the fights that are coming up next weekend.
For sure, as we pretty much like to do on a weekly basis. Before we get into the show and so much more, though, just wanted to give you guys a quick reminder to please be sure to like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. It's very, very important that you guys do so, as we just surpassed 900 subscribers. Very, very important. You could do so at youtube.com/ETP Network. And of course, you can listen to the MMA Outsiders wherever you get your podcast, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, so much more, YouTube Premium. So if you're on the road, if you're sipping your morning coffee, if you're doing whatever it is you're doing, you can do so and listen or watch the MMA Outsiders in whatever medium you choose that way. And again, if you're on the audio-only platforms, be sure to go back over to the YouTube home and vice versa as well. My name is Bando. I'm a staff writer for MMA Knockout on Sports Illustrated. He's Pat Danna, a Combat Sports UK journalist and a jack of all trades. Pat, you have anything coming up exciting in the MMA space that people should know about?
No, nothing too exciting. Just doing my regular work for now.
That's awesome. And just as a quick reminder, too, that the MMA Outsiders, as well as every single show on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, is presented by Playback. Obviously, Playback has been a wonderful sponsor to us. They've done a lot of work in terms of just stuff we're doing within the NBA, stuff we're doing within, potentially the NFL draft sphere. We just did a college football national championship live stream a few weeks ago, now almost a month ago, between Ohio State and Notre Dame, which is really exciting, and so much more. So it only takes about 30 seconds. If you go to playback.tv/ETP Network, you can join our community to find out more, including our live stream schedule, which is going to be very heavily fixated on weekly WWE live streams and Schreiber. He's one of our video editors, and a few of his friends are going to be doing various types of WWE content. And of course, as we get into baseball season and so much more, you'll potentially start seeing full-length MLB streams and different things like that. So stay tuned for all the stuff that we have coming up on Playback. But without further ado, now here we go. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience, from playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together, and as alluded to previously, you can do so playback.tv/ETP Network. With all of that stuff now out of the way, let's get into the nuts and bolts of what this episode is going to be. Starting with a recap of UFC Saudi Arabia. It was a pretty up and down roller coaster of a card, a solid preliminary portion. Could have been a better main card portion, but the main card ended with a bang. Nasruddin Imavov winning in the main event, knocking out former UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya after, on all accounts, in all likelihood, losing the first round and coming back in the second to win the way that he did. Pat, what were your early impressions of this fight? What did you think of the fight overall? And what did you think more specifically of Imavov's performance, given that this is probably the biggest win of his career to date?
Well, I mean, that was out of nowhere. I mean, that knockout was completely out of nowhere. I don't think anyone was expecting it. Izzy had the first round. Imavov did land that big uppercut, but Izzy looked good. And then early, what was it, 30 seconds into that second round?
30 seconds, yep.
Yep. He just got popped by an overhand right. I mean, it's one of those things where feels like the old Izzy would have either taken the punch or not even gotten hit by it. And it's pretty rough now, just looking at the way Izzy's career has went, honestly. Just in his past couple fights, he's lost by all different methods. He gets knocked out by Imavov, loses by submission to DDP, loses a unanimous decision to Sean Strickland. He's lost in every method to all the other top guys in his weight class at this point, and it's definitely looking like this is, if not the end, very close to it for Israel Adesanya.
Yeah, and to just piggyback off of the very, very potent point that you just said, I think it's very glaring and very alarming that you instantly bring that up, just considering the fact, too, that, you know, the numbers don't lie, and the numbers tell you that Israel Adesanya has been a very different fighter ever since the onset of the pandemic. He was 20-0 going into that stretch. It looks like he was unbeatable at 185 pounds. It looks like no one could stop him in his tracks. And I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was mental psyche. I don't know if it was, Robert Whittaker taking him to the brink in their rematch, and people starting to realize, oh, he might have holes in his game that no one was expecting. And then you get a guy in a kickboxing rival like Alex Pereira come over to the UFC and essentially take over the sport by storm. Well, at the time when he won the middleweight title in November of 2022, at least in my opinion, I don't think people really knew what Pereira was going to become eventually. So I think that fight, meaning the first time they fought in mixed martial arts out of their 2-fight series, was, I think, the fight, now looking back, was the fight where it just felt like it was a changing of the guard. What we didn't know was it was more than likely going to be the beginning of the end. And what sucks about Adesanya's, I guess, downfall from superstardom is that, you could argue that before he was finished by Imavov, that he was winning that fight. You could also argue that there were certain points in the Dricus du Plessis fight, the one last August, of course, where he looked good. He just couldn't get into that second vintage Adesanya gear that everybody's used to seeing. And unfortunately, I think in these last 2 losses specifically, even though he's been in this dry spell, as I said, losing 4 out of his last 5 fights, his lone win being Pereira. I don't know. It just seems like ever since, just something has seemed off, and it just kind of sucks because the vibe going into the fight was that Adesanya was reinvigorated. It seems like overall, based on his interviews and based on clips that he was sharing, that it looked like his camp was going well. It didn't seem like he was overlooking Imavov in any way. He probably figured that he needed to win this fight to stay in the mix for a middleweight title shot in a very crowded division, which is a very important fight coming up that we're going to talk about later. But overall, this whole intertwining, this passing of the torch, changing of the guard, I think Nasruddin Imam showed it with his performance and then some on Saturday. And I don't think anything can be taken away from the Frenchman. I think that this is the biggest win of his UFC career by far. And anyone who didn't know who Nasruddin Imamov was on Friday, well, I can tell you Tuesday night at the time that this is coming out, everybody knows who Imamov is now, and I think he's a force to be reckoned with at 185.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I love what you just said about, yeah, Izzy definitely is probably on the downcline, but that doesn't take away from Imavov's win and performance. I mean, come on, like that was a vicious right overhand he landed, and he just swarmed Izzy, gave him no room to breathe, hit him with that left hook as he was kind of falling, and that left hook that Imavov threw as Izzy was going to the ground is what I think really finished the fight. The right hand obviously had him hurt, but that left hook was nasty. So Imavov went in for that kill and got it done in a very nice way. He's now on this 4-fight win streak. He has knockout wins over Adesanya, the controversial one over Cannonier, and decision wins over Brendan Allen and Dolidze. He's looked incredible. He looks like a different fighter than the one that fought Sean Strickland, than the one that fought even Joaquin Buckley. He looks so much improved, and it just seems like he is getting better and better with each fight. Even that first round, Izzy did a good job, but Imavov still landed that big uppercut, and it seemed like he was just focused on landing that big shot to really test Izzy's chin, and it worked perfectly. It seemed like he had a very good game plan.
Well, you just made an excellent point, which I think is a point that no one has really made. I mean, you go back and you look at that Imamov Cannonier fight from UFC Louisville last June. I think a lot of people were discounting how Imamov looked because of the stoppage. I think now with the way that he just beat Adesanya, I think it makes that Cannonier win look a whole lot better.
Hmm.
That's for sure. You want to talk about a guy that had been in the upper echelon, had been on the doorstep of title shots, had gotten his one opportunity to break through, but he couldn't do it, and essentially lost to the guy who's now eventually broken through an Imamov. I think that what you just summed up in regards to his run is all of those guys you just mentioned have either been, in the top 10, in the top 5, or former champions. There's no denying that his win streak and his current resume and trajectory that he's on right now is one of these that I feel like you can't overlook, and I think that just ties a bow on kind of what I said previously, that if people didn't know who Imamov was before this Adesanya fight, they know who he is now.
Yeah,
So
and like you just said, this 4-fight win streak, it might be one of the better win streaks right now, just based off of names on his win streak. It might be
right.
one of the best in MMA right now, seriously, because it's a very impressive, definitely one of the best at middleweight for sure.
Well said. So before we kind of move away from this and move to the co-main event, because we have to address the elephant in the room, we have to address what Dana White said after the fight. So, as you know this, I'm going to tell the audience. I watch very strategically these post-fight scrums to really try to read between the lines into what Dana usually says. And to me, it seemed like without him saying it, he essentially admitted the, he felt that obviously Adesanya did enough to win the first round and that he got caught. Do you think in any sort of way that Dana may have insinuated that just maybe Imam have got lucky, or do you think it's simply because Dana's disappointed that one of his former champions, who was well on his way to being the greatest middleweight ever, is no longer that guy? What do you think?
I think it was more just disappointment with Izzy not being that guy anymore. I don't think he was trying to discredit Imavov's win necessarily. It was more just him kind of wanting Izzy to win in a sense, because now he also does have a dilemma on his hands with Imavov and Hamzat Chimaev. Who do you give the title shot? One's coming off a first round finish of Robert Whitaker. One's coming off a second round finish of Israel Adesanya. How do you break this up? They're both on big win streaks with big names on them. Like, it's very hard to determine who you're giving that title shot next. So Imavov knocking out Izzy did make his job a lot harder, honestly.
If you're you just brought up a great question. So if you're asking me, I'm a little mean, and I personally think that they should. I personally think that they should end up fighting each other. But it's j- it's just me, because I would rather have it be where the guy who's fighting for the championship has beat every guy that he needs to beat in order to say, oh yeah, I'm the rightful number one contender. Because if you give one guy a title shot over the other, you're essentially saying in sort of a biased way that you think that one performance was more impressive than the other, when the next person next to you says, "Oh no, I think that actually Hamza Jemaev's win over Robert Whitaker late last year was more impressive than Nasruddin Imamov's knockout over Israel Adesanya." So no matter how you slice or dice, who the UFC is going to give this eventual next title shot to, I think that there's going to be a sector of the fan base who's really happy, and a sector of the fan base who's really disappointed, and it's going to be up to the UFC to please the fans in the best way they can. But I think the most logical thing to do is to make both of them hate one another, very similarly to when Duplessis fought Whitaker to see who the clear number one contender at that point in July 2023 was going to be. Eventually, even after his injury, it ended up being Duplessis. We know what happened, but I feel like that's the most logical thing to do. Settle the number one contender at 185. What do you think?
Honestly, I can't tell you what the most logical thing is because I have no clue. I think they could really do whatever they want. Both of those guys deserve title shots. They could just make the fight between those guys if the winner of Dricus Sean needs some time off, wants some time off, whatever. Or if the winner of Dricus Sean wants an immediate fight. And I guess if I had to choose one, I would say Hamzat, only because it feels like he's been waiting on this title shot a little bit longer. And
He
he got
has.
the win, and he got the win first. I know that's not a great way to go about it, but he got the win first, and presumably he was next. So I think you just give it to Hamzat. But at the same time, if they give it to Imavov, you can't complain. Dude just knocked out Adesanya, you know? So there's definitely a lot of routes they could go with this. And like you said, even having them fight each other isn't a bad route if the champion doesn't want to fight again soon. But if the champion does want to fight again soon, I think the champion has a right to honestly pick whoever they want to fight at that point. Pick between the two. Like, who do you want? That would be my solution, I guess. You give the winner of Dricus Sean, you either tell them, all right, if you want time off, we'll have these two fight each other. If not, you pick who you want to fight.
So I'm going to go out on a bold prediction on February 4th, 2025 and just lay it on you. Are you ready?
Yep, go ahead.
I think we're going to get I'm just gonna say it because the UFC is weird, and I know what I'm about to say is not really going to make a whole lot of sense. But knowing the UFC does 1 to 5 things a year, where you just look at the format of the matchmaking, or you look at the stakes run, and you go, "How does this make sense?" Well, this is one of those scenarios. I think they're going to make a UFC interim middleweight championship and make these two fight, because I actually think this is kind of pointing to, eventually what we're going to talk about later. I think that one of these two in the main event is going to be so busted up that they're going to be out for at least the next 6 to 9 months. That's what I think.
It's very possible. That's a very possible take on that. And then if that does happen, I completely agree with you. Imavov Chimaev is the fight to make for the next title shot.
For sure, and I think that's a great way to cap that. Let's move on now to the co-main event. This was a little bit of a surprise. We had Char Bullet taking on Michael Venom Page, and the fight that you had alluded to at the very end of our episode last week was going to be a striking clinic, and it was everything and then some. What were your thoughts on his fight and just overall MVP's performance, having kind of adjusted to a newer weight division since coming into the UFC at primarily 170 pounds?
I mean, come on, MVP really couldn't have had a better debut. I mean, he styled on Char. I was surprised. For first off, I picked Char to win this fight, so I was wrong with my prediction for sure.
We both did.
I definitely thought it was a possibility that MVP would win the fight, but not in the way he did. He just styled on Char. Those first 2 rounds weren't close at all. Char didn't land a punch to the head, I think, until late round 2, early round 3. It was actually kind of absurd. He was only able to touch MVP's legs and a little bit of his body in those first 2 rounds. MVP was doing whatever he wanted, just kind of dancing around, doing his thing, tagging Char at range, even, not letting him get in the pocket. I mean, it was a masterclass of a striking performance, honestly. And I just don't see how he has a performance like that at 185 and drops back down to 170. Why even drop down? If you're gonna stay at 185, I mean, if you're gonna perform like this at 185, you might as well stay. And it really just depends on the matchups too.
Well, you just made a great point. And if you kind of look at welterweight, you and I both know this. There's really only, let's be real here, there's really only 5 guys in the division right now, and then there's essentially everybody else. It's clear to me that MVP could not hang with Ian Gary in the ways that I thought he was going to, and obviously, you just never know with some of these gatekeepers, if you will. And I think that there's a lot of transition at middleweight to where you don't really know, besides what we just kind of alluded to in the previous segment. You don't really know outside of Imavov and Whitaker, who really is going to be the next rightful challenger for the middleweight title. I think MVP just made a case where if he gets 1 to 2 more wins late this year, early 2026, you could be seeing him in potentially a number 1 contender or middleweight title fight. Just just considering the trajectory that he's on, it's clear from his post-fight interview he wants big fights. He wants big names. He doesn't really care what anybody thinks of him. All he cares about is that he's being seen by the most eyeballs possible. And when you have a primarily striking-based kickboxing style, that's all you can ask for. So
yeah, and I think that, MVP, if you want my honest opinion, what MVP should do, he should bounce between 185, 170, and maybe even 205, just getting the best possible matchups, the most exciting possible fights that he could make for striking fights. I don't want to see him fight a grappler again. I don't want to see him anything.
Right.
Just I don't even care, because he said he'd be willing to move up to 205 for potential fights. I would love to see MVP's striking style against another fighter that is not going to take him down, because it is just so interesting to watch him go to work. It really is. And if they limit his ability, it just wouldn't make any sense to me. You let him showcase what he's good at, give him a guy that can also showcase himself, and see what happens,
Mm-hmm. So with that being said, I think he would be one of the rare fighters to ever bounce between 4 different divisions. If he were to or I mean, in this case it would be 3. If he were to do that between 170, 185, and 205, I mean, how often are we talking? Is he fighting at 205 and 4 months later fighting at 170, and then 6 months later fighting at 185 and doing it all over again? And
I don't know. That'd really be up to him and just how he can manage his weight cuts, because I imagine his weight cut to 170 is pretty big. So I don't know. It would really just depend on what matchups he can get that are just exciting at the moment.
I mean, hey, if his walk around weight is 200, 210 pounds, 205 seems very, very much logical, given that the weight cut doesn't seem so bad.
Oh no, yeah, 205 would be. I mean, Yuri fights around 210 pounds. I'm pretty sure. 215. Right, yeah. So even then, like Yuri would be a similar-ish size to him at that point. So that would be an interesting fight, Yuri versus MVP. Sign me up.
Oh,
why not?
I think all the MMA hardcores would drool over that fight.
Come on, like that'd be such a fun fight, like why not just match him up with, like, screw weight class, as long as he's physically capable of making the weight, why not? Go for it. Just give MVP fun fights and let us see what we just saw this past weekend, because that was awesome. That was an incredible display of skill in striking.
So I'm sure you've seen it, but it hasn't. How do I word this? It hasn't seemed to have been confirmed by multiple credible sources. But there seems to be on the rumor. Well, before we get into how he looked, is that Shara could potentially be retired from MMA. If this were to potentially be true, what is your initial reaction to it, just given all of Shara's eye issues and stuff like that?
I really don't think it's true. Honestly, I'm not going to believe it until I see it from like Shara or one of his coaches or something. But I mean, I think it would be really soft if true. You can't lose a fight and then just retire. I thought he lost 2-1. I did think Shara came back and took that 3rd round.
I did too.
But he got styled on in the first 2, and there's no argument for anything else. MVP did him dirty in the first 2, and the 3rd round was the closest round of the fight.
Right.
So it wasn't an impressive performance by any means, but you can't retire after losing a 2-1 decision. No. I mean, no, like especially against a guy like MVP. Like MVP is very skilled. And when you don't try to take him down and you want to strike with him, that's a very possibility. What happened in that fight. So I would think it was a little soft, honestly, if he retires after 1 loss.
Just given we're timing wise, let's move on to some of the other performances. We had a lot of interesting standout performances on the undercard, particularly looked very good, and then of course you had CM, was a very exciting prospect, and then Aziev getting back on the words again was really good, and just to see the level of improvement from Jasmine Jasdavicius was very, very interesting. What did you think of all of these?
I mean, I thought all of them looked incredible, of course. That's why we're talking about them. But at the same time, Loke Dog, I mean, that fight was ugly. I'm not going to sit here and act like it was a technical, high-level fight. That was an ugly fight. and he clearly lost the first round, got dropped by a spinning back kick within like 10 seconds. It was kind of crazy. Like I was like shocked at first. I was like, whoa, this isn't looking good for Loke Dog. And he just dogged his way through it. He forced his pace, his pressure on Saeed, took him down, and just looked. It was a really interesting fight. It really was. They were just throwing haymakers back and forth at each other, and they were both gassed out.
I don't think a lot of people expected Oliveira to look the way that he looked after how the first round started, but you are 100% right.
Yep, and then Fares Ziam, I mean, 30-27ing Mike Davis is no, like that can't be overlooked. Mike Davis is a beast. Even though he's banged up, he doesn't fight too much, whatever. Mike Davis is a beast. He doesn't lose very easily. And Ziam just 30-27ing him the way he did, having his leg bent and everything was crazy. Moving on to Shamil Gaziev, I mean, come on. Walk-off KO. I love Gaziev. This isn't a secret. That is my guy. I love watching him fight. I'm very interested to see where he goes from this. He's now on a 2-fight win streak with coming off this big knockout. And I do think he will be a perennial top 15 fighter at heavyweight. So I can't wait to see him get another chance at that top 15 and hopefully make up for the mistakes he made in that Rosenstrike fight. And then not much to say about Jazz Davicius. She's a beast. She just took down a former title challenger at 135 with ease, pretty much. I mean, she did get her neck caught in some guillotines, but she worked out of them, wasn't ever in too much danger, and just an outclassing of Mayra Bueno Silva, honestly. And she is clearly a top 10 flyweight in the world. I would like to see her go against some of those girls that she lost against in the past, like Tracy Cortez and Natalia Silva, to potentially see if she's actually improved or what's exactly happened with her, because I don't know. I didn't think she should have lost to Tracy Cortez. So I want to see that fight again, honestly.
Well, if the UFC ends up going back to Canada, they have a good excuse as to who to headline, and that might end up being the perfect rematch for it. So
very well could be. Very well.
And just a few other quick notes before we move away and put a bow on UFC Saudi Arabia. It's the first time all year, Pat, that we didn't have a single submission finish on the entire card. Are you surprised?
Wow, no, I didn't even notice that. Yeah, that is kind of surprising. I guess we did have a couple submission artists on the card, but for the most part, I mean, it was a lot of strikers as well. I don't know. It's not too surprising, but it definitely is crazy anytime you go a card without a submission.
Out of 11 fights, you want to know how many decisions there were? 7.
Ooh, yeah, I was going to say 8. I thought there were a couple more, but yeah, it was all decisions and knockouts on this one.
Yep. Having all 7 decisions and 4 knockouts, so a pretty up and down card. Not the most exciting main card in the world. I finished 6-5. You finished 7-4. I was kind of thinking that you and I were both on such a hot streak that we weren't going to lose for a little bit, and then we fell off. What did you think?
No, yeah, I didn't have my main card picks too good. I got the co-main and main event wrong. That seems like a common theme lately, that I get some of the better fights on the card wrong. I guess I'm just good at predicting prelims.
It seems like you are too, considering that I also struggled to pick the main and co-main event this past week, but it's going to be a clean slate for UFC 312. I can tell you that.
Yes,
moving back over to the United States now, we had a major boxing event. We had David Benavidez taking on David Morrell Jr. in the main event of the first PBC on Amazon Prime boxing event of the year, and this was an absolute slugfest. David Benavidez retaining the interim light heavyweight championship on all 3 judges' scorecards that also included a very, very bizarre 118-108 scorecard that I just simply did not understand. What did you think of this fight overall, and do you think that these two delivered? Because I thought not only did they deliver, but they delivered in some for sure. This did not feel like an interim title fight by any stretch of the imagination whatsoever.
I mean, I'll always turn on a David Benavidez fight. I will always watch David Benavidez. He's been one of my favorite boxers since I started watching the sport years ago. He is just all action, all war. I mean, it's really hard not to like a guy like David Benavidez. I mean, halfway through that fight, he looked at the camera and he was talking his trash during it. I mean, he's ice cold, and he is just so entertaining. Even David Morrell, I mean, what a performance. I think it was his 12th pro boxing fight for Morrell, and he came out there and gave Benavidez one of the toughest fights of his career.
He's 11-0 going into it.
Yep, he was 11-0 going into that in his 12th professional boxing fight. He gave Benavidez one of his toughest fights yet, which was very impressive. He looked really good, but just Benavidez is too much for a lot of guys. His pressure is just something different. He hits like a truck. With that said, though, that 11th round was nuts. I mean, can we just talk about that 11th round for a minute? Morrell drops him, right? And it was like it was an interesting knockdown. It was a little bit weird at first, but he dropped him, and they brawl it out. Benavidez kind of ends the round going at Morrell, and then Morrell hits him after the bell and loses the point that he got from the knockdown. And it was just kind of chaos, especially that late in the fight when the scorecards may have been semi-close and Morrell needed some rounds. That would have been a massive moment for Morrell.
I was kind of thinking, I'm sure you probably may have had this creep in your head too, but I thought as soon as Harvey the referee deducted the point, I thought that both camps were going to start storming the ring and start fighting each other. That's how intense it got.
I didn't think so, but I don't blame you.
Brawl inside of the ring.
No, I don't blame you for thinking that, because I mean, seriously, it was very intense. Things were getting a little bit out of hand in that fight. It was getting crazy, but I mean, that was the entire fight. That entire fight was nuts. So yeah, no, I think that Benavidez is a true champion. Morrell will be a true champion coming up. This wasn't an interim championship fight. This was a true light heavyweight title fight. And anyone that disagrees should go ahead and watch it again if they haven't already.
For sure, and just really briefly, because it's a very critical part of the equation. In your opinion, do you think Benavidez fights Beterbiev or Bivol when they rematch later this month? Because that's the scenario going in. Benavidez has already punched his ticket. Now we need the other half of it. So,
that one's going to be rough. I mean, give me Bivol. Like I said, Bivol last time. That was a really, really close fight.
It was.
I don't know. I just think the youth on Bivol's side is going to play a factor, especially if they continue having these rematches between them.
For sure.
So I think I'll side with the youth of Bivol, but I mean, Beterbiev's a beast, and it would not shock me if that's who we end up seeing Benavidez fight. Funny enough, all of their last names start with a B. Bivol, Beterbiev, and Benavidez.
Another interesting fact that has to do with the first letter of people's names, Pat. That's 2 weeks in a row.
Yep.
You're exactly right.
I've been nailing the alliterations lately.
You are 100% right. Let's get into some news and notes now. This was probably the most sour note of the entire year. To this point, I don't even think it needs to be said. We sort of have to talk about this. The entire Bryce Mitchell saga. I guess in so many words, now that it's been a few days removed from everything that transpired, I'll let you give your floor first, and then I'll give mine, because I have some strong opinions as to what should and shouldn't have transpired off of this. But I'll let you go first.
Yeah. So simply, I mean, Bryce Mitchell's comments were stupid. His research was stupid and not well informed. And I mean, he's an idiot. I'm not surprised. He's an idiot. Maybe I'm a little surprised that he went as extreme as he did, but I don't think anyone's surprised that Bryce Mitchell isn't like a smart guy. You know what I mean? He has some takes that are like, and they make you think. And then he says something like this, and it's just like, all right, maybe I should never listen to a word that comes out of this guy's mouth, because really he's just a little bit unhinged, at least at the moment, as you can see. And no, this was completely inappropriate, completely uncalled for. He's completely wrong, obviously. And I like that Dana kind of ripped into him when he did address his comments. I don't think Bryce should be cut from the UFC. I'll start with that, I guess. I don't think he should have been cut. I do think he should have been reprimanded in some way, maybe a little bit more than what Dana reprimanded him. But I just think that there's no room in this sport for continued hate. There's enough hate as it is, with people having to fist fight each other in the cage and controversy and whatever. There has no room for this kind of hate and this kind of stupidity. So when it comes to stuff like this, Bryce, keep your mouth shut and just keep talking about seatbelts.
Fair enough. I mean, I guess to kind of ask you a follow-up question, and then I'll get into my thoughts. If you think that there's too much hate, and he said what he said about Hitler, can you kind of elaborate a little bit more as to why that wouldn't be enough? Because I think in any other sport, an athlete based on their stature would be either suspended for a certain number of years or flat out just removed from the organization, regardless of sport. So why do you think Mitchell's issue is slightly different in that he shouldn't be cut from the UFC ultimately?
Just because of Dana White and how he runs the UFC, how he lets Sean Strickland go out and say what he wants, how he's very for free speech and everything. Free speech doesn't mean free of consequences, but at the same time, I do respect that free speech is a thing for Dana White. So I just think that if he's going to stand by that with other fighters, it should be the same for this situation, even if this one is a little more out there than a lot of others.
Okay, fair enough. I also believe that he shouldn't be cut, but I would have liked to have seen a bit of just a little bit, just a little bit of a suspension, just considering the fact that what he said was to the literal like DEFCON extreme that I couldn't even believe. I when I first saw it, I couldn't even fathom that he even remotely said it. That was that was the first thing that blew me away, and the second thing that blew me away, well, it really didn't blow me away because this is how he is, but it's so funny in some respects. Dana's up there giving the speech and he's giving all the facts and figures, right? Then I don't know if you saw his facial expression, but like he, he looks down at his paper, checks the numbers that he needs to check, looks up, and he goes, you know, hey guys, so here's what we're gonna do. We're not gonna suspend him, and this is the beauty of the fight business because all of you guys get to see potentially Bryce Mitchell's ass get kicked on global television and starts laughing immediately afterward.
Yeah.
If that isn't the peak sheer madness of what combat sports truly is today, I don't know what it is, because you would not see that in any other sport, period. So
No, and I mean realistically, he's right. If you want, like, we'll see Bryce Mitchell fight. He'll be in fist fights with other men that is televised for everyone to see. You know what I'm like? It's very, very possible you could watch him get his ass beat, and that there's no problem with that. There's no problem with that. If you want to go see Bryce Mitchell get his ass beat, I'm sure there are a lot of people that do. I kind of even want to see him get hit up a little bit after that, because you just can't say stuff like that. But we're the only sport. It's the only sport that people can just, openly fight it out. So if you have a problem with what Bryce said, ask for the fight and fight it out.
yeah, which means you better believe that regardless of which card Bryce Mitchell is placed on, even if it's a fight night, don't be surprised if it ends up being the biggest UFC fight night ever. Simply because of what just happened here, even if it might be painted for all the wrong reasons. I think at the end of the day, even as really, really disgusting and anti-Semitic as the things that he said, at the end of the day, I think the people that want to see him lose are going to eventually get what they want. So I guess in some respects, what you just said is 100% true. But on the contrary to that, though, and this is where I'm going to push you a little bit, there have been other instances. For example, Michael Emperado, Miguel Torres, Thiago Silva, other just ridiculous out of the cage incidents. Even I can remotely throw in for Jason Mayhem Miller, even though that was a little bit of a different situation where there was no way he wasn't going to get released. What do you think? What do you think potentially doesn't make this on the level that those other 4 to 5 guys that I just mentioned potentially did?
That's a good point, honestly. I mean, I think it's more just the times. I think
Okay.
Dana is really against the whole cancel culture world that we live
Yeah.
in now. So I
Oh,
think
he
he's
for
just
sure
kind of
is.
changed. I think he's just kind of changed his mindset to how he approaches situations like this now. It's really the only thing, because that's a great point. You're right. Those are other similar situations where Dana has just cut ties immediately. And I would say it's because of the star that Bryce Mitchell is, but he's not a big
That's
enough
what I
star that the UFC wouldn't
that's
cut
what
him.
that's what I think too. I don't think if he was a top 15 featherweight that had a personality and did some things that maybe people think are a little out there, even the stuff just bringing the Bible in the cage and stuff like that. I don't think people would have the same perception of Bryce Mitchell that they do currently.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's very fair.
um, yeah, obviously, very. Oh, what happened? I'm sorry. Let me pause it. 5, 4, 3, 2. Moving away from Bryce Mitchell now over to arguably the biggest boxing news of 2025 so far. It's the fight that everybody's been waiting for. Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford is finally done for Las Vegas. T-Mobile Arena. Yeah, is the fight a few years too late, but I think it's the fight that everybody wants to see. Hopefully, so I was super excited to see this transpired. It was first reported by Ring Magazine and DAZN. Simply put, a countdown the days, man. I don't think boxing's had a Super Bowl level fight like this. That's a non-heavyweight fight since Mayweather Pacquiao, and I can't wait. What do you think?
No, I mean, this is literally the fight in boxing, right? This is what people wanted to see. This is probably the biggest fight in boxing that they could have made in the past, I don't know, 3 years at least, at the very least, probably 10, if we're really talking about just legacy versus legacy. These two guys have that, you know? I mean, Crawford is an absolute beast. He's been running through everyone and he's incredible. He's incredible. And Canelo is Canelo. This is what everyone wanted. I'm so happy that they actually got this done because honestly, it's a fight that intrigues me a lot because I've doubted Crawford in the past and been proven very wrong. So I'm not going to doubt him going into this fight with Canelo. I'm very interested to see if he can figure out that puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, I share your very similar feelings to you. I followed Terence Crawford's career ever since 2017 when he was fighting random dudes on top rank cards at arenas in Omaha, Nebraska that no longer exist anymore, and to see him get to the level where he's fighting Earl Spence on the same night as a major UFC event, a few cities over, literally running concurrently with UFC 291, like I'm just gonna say that's the kind of stuff that boxing needs. They need to keep building fights where either they're competing with the UFC, but the fight is big enough to compete with the UFC on the same night, or you need to say, look, these are like 5 dedicated weekends a year. These are the 5 biggest boxing weekends of the year where there's no MMA to worry about, and we are overtaking combat sports. Assuming that they plan this right, assuming it's around Cinco de Mayo weekend, hopefully, boxing will be the prime time spectacle event, and that people can tune in after college football to watch because this fight deserves the standalone treatment more than any in the last several years. I can honestly not wait for it. My early pick is actually going to be the upset. I've been in the Terence Crawford train since 2017. I haven't picked him to lose yet, and until he loses, I'm not gonna pick against him. So my way too early prediction right now on February 4th, 2025 is Terence Crawford beats Canelo Alvarez, and assuming it's an undisputed title fight, takes all of his belts with him too. So I'm gonna go bold and say that the Nebraska native gets it done. What do you think?
First off, I did want to just say they did a great job putting this fight in Vegas too. Perfect location. I mean, they're like that's just the one other thing I wanted to point out because I think that was a great job putting this fight in Vegas because it's the hub. It's where everyone will go for it, you know? Everyone will go to Las Vegas to see this fight. So one, I thought that was perfect. But two, for the actual prediction, my early prediction is a Canelo robbery decision. I think Crawford might actually do enough to that a lot of fans think he might win, but then he doesn't actually get the nod on the scorecards because they do seem to favor Canelo a little bit when it comes to those scorecards.
Well, Jose, and I think you just alluded to it in a great point too. Las Vegas has been a Canelo fight hub home for several years. Could there be some hometown bias? Could there be a couple of Nevada State Athletic Commission judges that we don't like judging that fight 100%? But that remains to be seen. We'll have tons of time to preview that fight as it gets closer. Let's get back into more of the news items now. We had a couple of fight announcements. First one being Bobby Green versus Mauricio Ruffy, set for what's going to be a pretty stacked card at UFC 313 in Las Vegas. Obviously, headlined by Pereira Nankawayev. What are your early thoughts on this banger? Just considering that both of these guys' styles are very similar.
Well, I think it's a great fight. I think that, I think it's going to be a striking battle. I don't think this fight will hit the ground too much. I think these two are going to slug it out. And honestly, I think one of them is probably going to go out or break at some point. I do think this fight will end by TKO. I think it's a great clash of matchups. As you just said, these guys are kind of similar. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see who actually is better at implementing that style when they're facing that exact same style almost. And I just love this matchmaking. It's very solid matchmaking. It's a big step up for Mauricio Ruffy that he did need after some of the hype he's gotten, and it's a big chance for Bobby Green to go out there and put down another prospect and gets his name back in the mix. So I love this matchmaking, and I think they did a great job.
For sure. And then moving over about a month later, we have a critical women's fight, obviously between Xiaonan and Virna Jandiroba. Obviously, Xiaonan, a former title challenger, Virna Jandiroba knocking on the door. How big is this fight, considering what we're going to talk about in a few minutes directly involves Zhang? I think that this is a very important fight over that division, and just moving forward, considering that this fight might solve the logjam that we're getting there in a division that I think has been pretty status quo for the last few years. This is the first speed bump that I've seen in quite some time. What do you think?
I mean, for classic striker versus grappler matchup, Xiaonan the striker, Virna Jandiroba the grappler. Going to be interesting to see who actually finds success with their game plan. And yeah, no, I completely agree that this fight is pivotal because it will likely determine who the next title challenger is. If Virna wins, she could fight either of those girls next. If Yan wins, she could fight Tatiana next, or we could even see a Wei Li rematch because that first fight was interesting. Yan had some moments in that fight for sure.
She did, especially later on round 3, and you could even argue a little bit in round 4 if she would have had just enough time. On 5 could have been the round that decided it, but unfortunately she gassed out a little bit before getting to that point. So you made a great point.
Yeah, no. So I think that the winner of this fight is all but next for a title shot, especially if it's Virna Jandiroba. She is next for a title shot. Yan Xiaonan, the only way she wouldn't be is if Wei Li does beat Tatiana and Yan Xiaonan beats Virna. They might not do the rematch then right away. It wouldn't be right away, but that soon after. But I could easily see it still happening. And yeah, the winner of this fight likely fights the winner of the title fight this weekend.
Okay. Speaking of some more announcements, we have been hinted at some newer locations, particularly in late April and early May. One of them being UFC Kansas City, penciled in for April 26th, and then the very next week, for the first time since July of 1999, it was all the way back at UFC 21. It's looking like, barring any crazy surprises, that the UFC will be going back to Iowa of all places. So it's cool to see that when the UFC alluded to the fact that they would be going on the road for these fight night events, they literally meant it. But what I think is even crazier is hitting 2 eerily close Midwest cities 2 weekends in a row. You never see that. What did you think when you saw these announcements? And assuming that obviously because these markets are gigantic markets for the UFC, and given how long it's been since the UFC's been to Iowa, I just have a good feeling that regardless of which card people choose to go to, I think more than likely I'll be going to the Des Moines, Iowa one. But regardless of which card people decide to go to, how do you think the demand for both of these cards will be? And what do you think overall of these location decisions having waited as long as they have to come back? Because they haven't been back to Kansas City in obviously 2 years. And obviously, as I just alluded to, they haven't been back to Iowa since '99. So what are your overall initial thoughts as these dates start to settle into, I guess, hardcore MMA fans' heads, if you will?
I think that it's very weird. I was not expecting it at all, like whatsoever. I was really caught off guard when they announced both Iowa and Kansas City cards. It was kind of just like out there, and I was like, whoa, like Kansas City makes a little bit more sense. We've seen them go there a little bit more recently, but Iowa caught me off guard. I was like, whoa, what are they planning out in Iowa? They don't even have a lot of big fighters from there. I don't know if they have many at all.
No, I don't think I don't think so.
So it was an interesting thing to do, but I don't mind. Let's keep traveling to more places for fight nights. Make the sport more global, more national, whatever we need to do to keep growing the sport. Putting it in places that it doesn't go to normally is completely fine. And I'm always for adding more spots to the UFC schedule. And I think that it will be interesting. I think they'll get a couple big Midwest stars on the Iowa card, especially the Kansas City card. And I think they'll have some big names. I think they'll do a good job breaking those places in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's someone who's been to the venue where this fight is going to be, obviously for a totally different sport in March Madness, Pat. When I tell you that they pack the Wells Fargo Center out, they do it and then some. You got people coming from all over the Midwest to see sports, regardless if it's college basketball, bull riding, rodeo, you see whatever it is. You better believe that as soon as these Iowa tickets go on sale, they're going to go. They're going to go fast.
Oh yeah.
That's the guaranteed thing, and you could put anybody on a UFC card. But if you sit back and look at the UFC now from where the UFC was, I can guarantee you that there are tons of diehard fans in Iowa that have literally been praying that one day that they would make it back to Iowa, and now they're finally doing it. So that's the wild part of the. And again, I still cannot wrap my brain around that they're going to two Midwest cities 2 weekends in a row. I don't know if that's unprecedented or anything, but I can almost guarantee with 99% certainty you're not going to see that again. So
Yeah, no, very rare.
for sure.
Hopefully we do see it again though. Hopefully this does become a more common thing for them. That would be really cool.
For sure. We just have a couple more before getting to the previews very, very quickly. Aljamain Sterling is essentially giving out who he wants to fight next, and he's giving out two pretty prominent names. Obviously, Arnold Allen, who's some of the best fighters in the world, and actually between both of these guys, they have a very similar common opponent in Max Holloway. What do you think of these two options for Sterling, and which one do you think makes the most sense? Because I have a feeling that stylistically he just given where Brian Ortega is in his career, I would love to see the Arnold Allen fight a little bit more. What do you think?
I want to see that Ortega fight, man. I've wanted to for years. When Aljo was the bantamweight champion and Ortega was fighting for the featherweight championship, I had said that was a fight I wanted to see down the line sometime, and that's a fight I want to see now that it's possible. Just give me all of Aljamain Sterling versus Brian Ortega in those grappling exchanges. I'd love to see that fight.
Okay, if you were to guess which one do you think is more likely to happen, and if you were to give a brief forecast prediction as to when this potential Sterling return would take place, what would you say about it?
I think Aljo said April, so I would say around April, May, one of those months,
Okay.
middle of the year. And if I had to say which one was more likely, I'd say it was probably Arnold Allen because I know Arnold Allen was in the rumors of fighting in March, but had a little injury that they weren't sure if they would get cleared. So if that's the case, then April, May for Arnold Allen would make sense as well. I'm not sure where Ortega's at this point. I'm not sure when he plans to fight again. So I feel like Arnold Allen might be the more realistic matchup, but give me all of the Ortega matchup.
For sure. Let's move into full UFC 312 mode as we wrap everything up. First thing, a major talking point going into the highly anticipated rematch between Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland, 13 months in the making. Sean Strickland did a very specific request going into this fight that he wants DDP to only stand with him. DDP, of course, as he should, as the rightful champion and the guy who won the first fight, obviously declined Sean Strickland's request. So I just think that adds to the heat of the fight even more. Obviously, I don't think it's going to get into a situation where Sean O'Malley versus Marab, and you got Tim Welsh screaming at the other corner. But I definitely think it's just going into this week and going into obviously UFC Media Day, the press conference, and the weigh-in. To me, there just seems to be an already at a build up. Both of them have gone on the record in various interviews saying that they're both willing to die to potentially gain or regain their respective championships. To me, I feel like there's a chip on both guys' shoulders, and that's just what makes the fight even way more interesting. What do you think overall, though?
No, yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly. I mean, Dricus has no reason that he would have accepted this request or should accept this request. He's also the better fighter on the ground, so obviously he's going to be wanting to use his wrestling more than Strickland would. And no, I think you hit the nail on the head with this one. I really don't have much to add.
For sure. Now let's get into predictions with the main event. Obviously, the rematch, of course, DDP and Strickland. Obviously, 5 rounds. We know what happened at UFC 297 all the way back in Canada in January of last year. We've now finally reached the week of the fight. I'm still sticking with the champion. I just think that Dricus du Plessis is a little bit better at this point. But I think if Sean Strickland makes this fight ugly and it gets into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds, I wouldn't be surprised with honestly anything. But what do you think?
Well, this was a fight that was just so controversial and so highly debated, the scorecards and everything.
It
I
was.
did think
You and I,
did think Dricus won the first time. He looked great in his title defense against Israel Adesanya. Obviously, he did drop a round or two, but that was to be expected. I mean, it's just kind of Dricus' style. He ended up breaking Izzy down and breaking him, finishing that fight. Honestly, it's a tough one for me. I really think Dricus just offers a lot more than Sean. I do. I think he has more power. I think he's less technical, but it doesn't really matter. I think he's just got a little bit more of that dog in him, and he just has more to offer, more submissions, more grappling, just a better arsenal of strikes, just throws more kinds of strikes. And I just have to continue to go with Dricus in this one because I did think he won the first fight, and I think he just has a better skill set than Strickland. With that said, Strickland is a beast with ridiculous cardio. I could see him potentially, changing his style of fight a bit up and trying to finish Dricus in this fight. I think that it might cost him if he does. I don't know. My early lead in this fight is that Dricus will get the knockout finish, but I did say the same thing the first time and then ended up switching to a decision not too long before the fight happened. So I could very well have the same thing happen here, but I think give me DDP by knockout. I really do think that he could find Strickland's chin and potentially catch it and finish him.
And I could definitely see this happening as well. But it's good to know that we're both on the same wavelength of. And still moving over to the co-main event now, we got Weili Zhang versus Tatiana Suarez. Highly anticipated fight of that Suarez has been clamoring for over a year. This is her moment, obviously, to shine. It's honestly don't think it's her time. I think that Weili is just too good with where she currently is in her career. I think that Tatiana will have to pull off some sort of miracle knockout or miracle finish that no one is expecting, almost like a Holly Holm and a Rousey-esque type of performance. Weili is another one of those fighters where it's really hard to pick against her until she loses. And instead of with all that fact above, I like Weili to win this fight by unanimous decision. What do you think?
So with that said, you can brought up Holly Holm Ronda. There's a big difference in this fight. A big difference. That is no. That is the betting line, actually. The betting line has actually flipped to Tatiana Suarez as the favorite in recent days. From what I know, Tatiana is sitting at about minus 120 right now, and she is a slight favorite after being a slight underdog for most of the buildup and everything. I think it's kind of crazy. I don't know how you could say Tatiana is the favorite in this fight after Weili's been so much more active, just fought better not overall, but better recent competition. And I just think I love Suarez. I've seen her as a future champion for years and years. Like years ago, I said Tatiana was going to be champ. The injuries, the layoffs, just everything. I don't know how she can be a favorite in this fight. I do want to still pick her to win. I just don't know if I can. It just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. Like you said, it's not Tatiana's time. And the problem with that was her time was like 4 or 5 years ago. That was her time. That's when she was the best strawweight in the world. And you cannot tell me that Tatiana wasn't going to be the champion at strawweight if she didn't get hurt. I'm sorry. I won't even listen to the argument. She finished Esparza. She finished Grasso. I mean, she finished 2 future champions at her weight class and the weight class above her. So she was the best strawweight in the world at one time. I just don't I just don't know if she is anymore, honestly, and it hurts me to say because I love Tatiana and I really do want her to win this fight. I will be pulling for her too. I just don't think I can pick her. I'm going to take Weili by decision. Let's say I think Tatiana might tough it out.
Okay, so we both agree there, and that is a perfect way to end it. That's going to do it. This has been episode 113 of the MMA Outsiders with myself, Zain Bando. To my right is Pat, Danna, of course. And just a quick reminder that the MMA Outsiders in every single show on the Empty the Bench podcast network is presented by Playback. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. We hope you enjoy the appetizer to the Super Bowl that is UFC 312. And we hope you enjoy the Super Bowl between Kansas City and Philadelphia from New Orleans this Sunday. Until next week, we will see you guys soon.
And don't forget to subscribe to our Patreon, ETB Network Patreon coming up soon.
Close. We're actually not on Patreon. It's Substack.
Oh, Substack. My apologies. So make sure you subscribe to the ETB Network Substack and make sure so you get some articles from us. I'm going to be releasing some articles around the NFL and MMA, and Zain is going to be doing a lot of work there as well. We're going to be doing a lot on there, so definitely make sure you check that out.
Absolutely, very, very nice plug to end the show. So for Pat, I'm Zain. We will see you guys next week. Have a good one.
Have a good one.